Good evening and welcome to it. This is the Private Property Podcast with myself, Sibs Matiela, your host. We are talking title deeds. Why do I need one? And to help us understand them, we have Alicia Heyneke, who is an associate attorney, notary and conveyancer at Adams & Adams. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Sibs. It's nice to be here.
Alicia, so notary public attorneys are very well known for, witnessing signatures, commissioning affidavits, attesting contracts, and, that's not all they do all of the time. Do you want to give us maybe some insight as to what your job description actually entails?
Yeah, so Sibs, maybe I can just help distinguish between the notary, what a notary does, and what a conveyancer does, especially from a property perspective. So I know in many countries abroad, we have a notary which plays a pivotal role in registering property. They basically help to conclude the agreement, they legalize it, and then once that contract is legalized by a notary, it becomes the transfer is basically effected. But in the South African context, it's a little more complicated. We actually have quite a sophisticated property registration system. So even though a notary does get involved from time to time with certain of the documents that get registered at the deeds office, they are not the main attorney responsible for the conveyance of property or the registration of property. For that, you're going to need a conveyancer. And the conveyancer often takes on either of three roles in a normal property transaction. It's either going to be your transferring attorney, which is the transferring conveyancer, the conveyancing attorney who's going to register the transfer from the seller's name into the purchaser's name. And then often if your purchaser is going to need finance to, a loan from a bank to pay for the property, the bank will appoint an attorney who serves on their panel, which is also going to be a conveyancing attorney, and that attorney will attend to the registration of the bond. And then lastly, it's not always applicable, but if the seller, when the seller purchased the property, they had a bond at the time when they registered the property, when they became the owner, then that bond obviously needs to be cancelled. And so then you will have a cancellation attorney, which is also a conveyancer.
Alicia, could you explain to me the legal procedure that's involved in purchasing a residential property?
Yes, it's a little bit of a loaded question because it's quite involved, the process. As I've already mentioned to you, the land registration system in South Africa is fairly complex. In fact, it's widely acknowledged as being one of the best systems in the world because it's so organized and it's very technical, but it does give a property owner quite comfort in the sense that their rights are very well secured. So as in many other countries, the process, obviously, once you find the property, you have to first look for a property that you want to buy. But then once you find that property, the process also starts with the signing of an agreement of sale. And in fact, we have an act in the country. It's called the Alienation of Land Act. It says that you cannot sell or you cannot conclude a transaction for the sale of immovable property unless it is in writing. So that is the starting point. We need to have the contract in writing. Usually it takes on we call it an offer to purchase. So the purchaser makes an offer to the seller. And then if the seller is happy with the terms and they accept it, then that becomes the agreement of sale. And it's usually the seller who has the prerogative to appoint the transferring attorney or the conveyancer that's going to run with the whole thing. Once they agree on a conveyancing attorney, usually when an agent is involved, the agent will also give some guidance as to who they can appoint. And then the contract goes to the attorney, and then the attorney is going to start with that process. And the transferring attorney is the one who drives the process. And that attorney is going to gather all the documents. There's a myriad of acts and legislation and rules that they need to comply with or that they need to take into account throughout the process. And then basically deal with all those people, get all the information. There's going to be clearances from the municipality. There's going to be rates and taxes, and SARS needs to be involved. And then they also liaise with all the other conveyances in the process. So if there is a bond to be registered, then that links into this process. If there's a cancellation, and then once everything is ready, then it goes to the deeds office. All of this gets registered simultaneously. So the transfer gets registered simultaneously with the purchaser's bond and with the cancellation of the seller's existing property. And then there's an examination process that takes place at the deeds office. So once that is completed, then you have a registered property.
Got you. So why would you say it's important for someone to acquire a title deed for a property?
Well, the title deed serves as your proof of your ownership. It's proof that this particular property is registered in your name as the owner. And then also if you want to deal with that property. So if you want to sell it again, if you want to register, let's say you want to register a further bond, maybe you have a bond with one bank and you get a better interest rate at another bank and you want to switch to that other bank. Maybe you need to register a servitude over your property. Whatever it is that you're going to do, you're going to have to lodge that original title deed. And it's important to keep it safe because if it gets lost, then there's a whole process that needs to be followed in order to replace that lost title deed. It involves an application to the deeds office. There's also publication of your intention to apply for a duplicate copy or duplicate original. And those things, apart from the fact that it does cost extra money, it could cause a delay in the transaction, which is what you want to avoid.
I hear you. So when someone buys a house, obviously the current owner will have the title deed. How does the transfer then happen from the current owner to the now new owner?
All right, so as I've already explained, the transferring attorney is going to drive this whole process. So we're going to need a new title deed for you as the new owner. So what happens in the deeds office is we're going to lodge certain documents, which is now forms part of the documents that the transferring attorney would have gathered, collected, and prepared. And one of the documents is called the deed of transfer. And this is actually a prescribed form. You'll find it in the regulations to the Deeds Registries Act. And it basically says that this is the current owner. This property was sold on this date for this price, and it's been transferred to this person. It has the property description, and it also has the conditions which may be applicable to that property. That is one of the documents that forms part of the little batch of documents that are lodged together. Then it goes through the examination process, and right at the end, the registrar of deeds executes it, or which is just a fancy word for saying that they are signing it. But once they sign it or it's executed, it becomes the registered title deed. So it's the deed of transfer. I know owners sometimes get a little confused because the title of the document is not title deed, it says deed of transfer. But then once it has the seal of office of the registrar right at the back of it, it becomes the title deed of the property.
Got you. So, like when you fill in forms and they ask a lot of invasive questions, like what's your blood type, who's your favorite Twilight character, things like that. And they ask if you're married or unmarried, and you're like, it's really tough out there. Tinder's not really working for me. Why is this any of your business? Does this kind of thing work differently for like married people versus single people versus people in polyamorous relationships? Why does the relationship status matter, and how does it affect things?
It does matter a lot because it affects the proprietary consequences of that relationship and the parties' estates. And it's one of the things that the conveyancer will cite on the documents itself. So everything that gets lodged at the deeds office will state how you are married. So the process itself is not different from whether you are a single person acquiring a property or whether you are spouses married in or out of community of property. The process is essentially the same, but the conveyancer does need to make sure what is the marital status of the parties. Just to give you an example, if I buy a property, I'm single, I buy a property, but then I get married in community of property, then my property is automatically going to form part of the joint estate of our spouses, because that is the effect of concluding a marriage in community of property. But if I get married out of community of property, then that property still stays in my own separate estate. So that's the reason why we need to make sure that as the conveyancers, one of your jobs to make sure that you understand and you know what is the consequences of that person's marital regime. And then also, once again, when they sell the property, both spouses will have to act jointly. One spouse cannot sell the other spouse's share without their consent.
Got it. Alicia, all delays aside and dramas and things that fall through, holes, deals that don't go through, how long would it take to acquire a title deed, and what's the registration process like if everything goes smoothly and perfectly?
Yes. It's still even difficult. Even if everything goes smoothly, it can depend. It can vary. So I'm sure you've heard that they say it takes 3 months, which I guess is not a inaccurate estimate. That's more or less what it could take, but it will depend on a lot of factors because each transaction is unique. It has different conditions. You have different role players. But we do see, for example, that a cash transaction where there's no conditions delaying the transaction, the purchaser has got the cash readily available. There's no delays at any of the municipalities, the deeds office, SARS. You can see that property being transferred in under a month, which is great. But then in other instances, it can take a little bit longer. So sometimes you'll see, for example, that a purchaser has included a condition in the sale agreement that they first need to sell their existing property. So you have to wait for that transaction to get concluded, and then only will your transaction proceed. Or there's a tenant in the property, and the purchaser wants vacant occupation. So then the transaction will be held back until the tenant has vacated the property so that the new owner can move in right away. So there are a lot of factors, and sometimes these things are out of the conveyancer's control. You'll have COVID issues, you'll have, there's no electricity in the deeds office building, so it's closed for a few days. So these are the day-to-day things that we often encounter. But the deeds office, once it's in the deeds office, it's fairly quick. You're looking at about anything from 5 to 10 working days. So once it's in the deeds office and there isn't any backlogs, then it can be very quick.
Okay. In a hypothetical situation, which might not be very hypothetical at all, some single friends decide, let's put some money together and buy a commercial property. And we'll either rent it out or we'll all live there, or we'll do like a sister wives thing with the one spouse, but we're all married to them. I don't know. It could be anything. In terms of that, who now would have their name on that title deed, and how would you acquire it?
Well, it will be in all of their names. So it will have each person's name if they do decide that they want to buy the property in their personal names. You will have, this is the owner, this is the property, or the date of the transaction was concluded, this is the property, and it's being transferred to Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mr. Z, with their marital status, their ID numbers. So all of that will be in there. But then essentially they will sit with one title deed. But there is a way conveyancers can help you to get a separate title deed. So if you want a separate title deed just for your share, then that's something that you can get with a special application to the deeds office.
So it's not that we get the same one, then we photocopy it and get it certified, and then we all have a title deed.
No, you can do that for your own records, of course, but there will only ever be one original.
In the case where a house is, and I'm sure this does happen, a house is not registered and has no title deed, how do you go about selling that house?
The problem is, I guess it will depend. You need to get a title deed. So in order for a property to be transferred and registered and transferred at the deeds office, there must be a title deed. But I mean, in the landscape from a South African perspective, we also need to acknowledge that there are unregistered or at least informal property ownership rights. It's not a topic that I will go into much because I personally don't have that much experience, but it is something that's there where municipalities and governments are, it's an ongoing process of trying to upgrade these land tenures, which means that we're trying to assist occupiers to get full ownership of property. We have colleagues in our department who are a bit more clued up with those things. But yes, you would need to get a title deed in order to sell your property. So if it's lost, then as I've already said, if you do have a title deed for your property, you are the registered owner, then you can, with certain publications and applications, we can get a new title deed.
Alicia, in your experience, what legal mistakes do landlords typically make when now acquiring a property or trying to get tenants into that property?
Well, leases can be a completely different topic of conversation, which can keep us busy for a long time.
So we'll
But I
save that
guess
for
it will.
another episode.
Yes, but I guess the most important thing as a landlord and you want to buy property to rent it out, you'll probably be best off to make use of an agency or an estate agency or a property managing agency who can help you to source reliable tenants, to make sure the right agreements are in place and the correct checks are done beforehand, so to make sure that the people you have in your property are going to be good tenants.
What's the one piece of advice, legal advice, that you would give to someone entering the property market?
I think from our experience, the one of the biggest issues that we see with especially first-time home buyers is that they are not really familiar with all the costs involved. And there is a lot of cost involved when you purchase a property. And so I think the best advice that I can give owners is to make sure that you do your homework so that you know what you're in for. Firstly, to know what you can afford. So if you're going to be buying a property, you want to make sure that you get some bond pre-approval, so you can see what is the amount of the loan that you will qualify for, what is the amount of deposit that you would be able to afford to put down for the property, so that you know what your monthly bond installments are going to be. But then apart from that, as you purchase the property, there's going to be costs. So there's going to be conveyancing attorney fees, both for the transfer of the property and for the registration of the bond. And then there's going to be taxes. If the property is valued at more than $1 million, there's going to be taxes payable to source. We call it transfer duty. And then once you become the owner of the property, apart from the bond installment, there's going to be rates and taxes. So your municipal charges, your utilities for water, electricity. If you live in a complex or in an estate, there's going to be monthly levies. These are all the costs that they need to take into account. But we have a few good articles on our website which list all these costs, and there's some cost calculators which your listeners might find helpful.
Ladies, gentlemen, and they, thems, that was Alicia Heyneke from Adams and Adams. Thank you so much for joining us today, talking all things title deeds. Why do I need one? And how much money do I need? Because it sounds like a lot. Thank you, Alicia, for joining us.
It was great talking. Thank you so much.
Listen, that was today's episode of the Private Property Podcast. My name is Sibs Matiela. I'm your host, and I will be back for another episode tomorrow evening. I'll see you then.